911, what's your emergency?
A friend of ours is dead in his bedroom. We haven't heard from him for a while. We think he's dead. I can give you the phone to someone who went in there.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi, so what's going on?
He's dead. He's in his bedroom.
Okay.
In the shower.
Okay. How did this happen? Do you have any idea?
No, we have no idea. Everyone's been wondering about him for a few days.
She said there's blood. So is it coming from his head? Did he cut his head?
It's all over the place.
Is there any weapons around?
I don't know. Not that I saw.
In June of 2008, a murder was committed in Mesa, Arizona, so savage that the Associated Press would later call the trial surrounding it a worldwide sensation. A case that captivated the entire country and generated more social media activity than any criminal proceeding of its era. A 30-year-old motivational speaker, a man who had overcome a childhood of poverty and addiction to build a life people admired, was found butchered inside his own home, and the person responsible was someone he had loved. This is footage from inside a police interrogation room in Arizona. The woman you are watching is the prime suspect in her ex-boyfriend's murder. His body had been found days earlier by friends, decomposing behind a locked bedroom door. 27 stab wounds across his back and torso, his throat slashed so deep the blade reached nearly to his spinal cord, a single gunshot wound to the forehead, a bloody palm print on the hallway wall, her DNA mixed with his, and a digital camera pulled from the washing machine, still holding photographs no one was meant to see. And she's singing. When officers returned to the room and told her she was being charged with first-degree murder, she didn't ask for a lawyer. She asked if she could put on makeup before they took her mugshot. Most people watched this footage and saw a monster, but that reading skips past a more uncomfortable truth. The stalking was documented, the break-ins were reported, friends watched the obsession escalate for months and told him to run. Every warning sign was visible, and none of it was enough. This isn't just the story of how Jodi Arias killed Travis Alexander. It's the story of how everyone around them watched a threat build in plain sight and couldn't stop what was coming. Please like the video, leave a comment, and hit the subscribe button for more stories. This goes a long way in helping us. Thank you. To understand what happened to Travis Alexander, you first have to understand the woman who walked into his life and the pattern she carried with her long before they ever met. Jodi Arias was born on July 9, 1980 in Salinas, California to William and Sandra Arias. By all outward appearances, it was an ordinary middle-class upbringing. But during her trial, Arias would claim that her childhood had been anything but ordinary, alleging that both parents physically abused her from the age of 7, beating her with belts and wooden spoons. Her parents denied this. The claims remained unproven in court. What is documented is that the family relocated to Eureka, a small city in Northern California, when Jodi was around 12. She enrolled at Eureka Union High School, where her teenage years were marked by increasing defiance. She was caught growing marijuana on her parents' property, and in a detail that would foreshadow a lifelong pattern of fractured trust, her own parents turned her in to the police. That decision seeded a deep-seated resentment that, according to Arias, never fully healed. By her junior year, she had stopped attending classes entirely. She dropped out in the 11th grade and later earned her GED, but the damage to her relationship with her family was already done. Arias moved in with an older boyfriend, the first in a series of decisions where she anchored her identity to the person closest to her. That relationship eventually ended, and Arias drifted through a string of service jobs before landing work at the Ventana Inn and Spa, a luxury hotel perched along the cliffs of Big Sur. There, in 2001, she met the restaurant's manager, a man named Daryl Brewer. The two began dating, moved in together, and co-purchased a home in Palm Desert. By every available account, the relationship was stable. When Brewer later took the witness stand, he described Arias as loving, easy to be around, and, notably, never possessive, never controlling, never jealous. They were together for 4 years. That detail matters, because it tells us that the obsessive behavior that would later define Arias's life was not a permanent fixture of her personality. It was something that specific circumstances brought out. The Brewer years were calm. Something about the next relationship would be different. In early 2006, while still with Brewer, Arias discovered Prepaid Legal Services, a multi-level marketing company that offered her something she had been searching for since she left home, a sense of purpose and a new identity to step into. She threw herself into the work. She dyed her hair blonde, she packed her belongings, and she ended things with Brewer, the longest stable relationship she had ever known, to chase a fresh start. It was a pattern that had repeated throughout her life, each chapter ending the same way: erase who she was, attach to something new, become someone else. But the next relationship would be different, and the consequences would be permanent. But before that relationship begins, you need to know the man on the other side of it, because Travis Alexander was far more than what happened to him. He was born on July 28, 1977, in Riverside, California, to Gary David Alexander and Pamela Elizabeth Morgan Alexander. Both of his parents were drug addicts. The household Travis grew up in was defined by instability, poverty, substance abuse, and the kind of chaos that leaves permanent marks on children who survive it. By the age of 8, Travis and his 7 siblings were removed from that environment and taken in by their paternal grandmother, who raised them in a home that finally offered some measure of structure and safety. It was not an easy transition. Those who knew Travis as a young man described him as rough around the edges, quick-tempered, prone to getting into fights, still carrying the residue of the world he came from. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. Travis found direction. He converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and the faith became central to everything he built from that point forward: his values, his community, his sense of purpose. In 1997, Travis's father died. He was 19. The loss added another layer of grief to an already difficult life. But rather than retreat, Travis leaned further into the identity he was building. He threw himself into personal development, devoured self-help literature, and began channeling his natural charisma into professional ambition. He took a position as a salesman and motivational speaker for Prepaid Legal Services, the same company Jodi Arias would later join, and he excelled. He was good at it. He was good with people. Friends who knew him well painted a consistent picture. They described him as gregarious, social, and impossible not to like. One close friend recalled that Travis was deeply interested in philosophy and personal development, always talking about how to be a better person, how to build something meaningful. He had a creative side, too. Travis performed stand-up comedy under the stage name Eddie Snell, a detail that captures something essential about who he was, a man who could make a room full of strangers laugh. He was also, by all accounts, someone who attracted attention. Friends described him as magnetic, the kind of person who drew people in effortlessly. One friend put it simply: he was very easy to get along with, and that attracted a lot of friends and a lot of women. By his late 20s, Travis Alexander had built a life that looked nothing like the one he came from. He had a career, a community, a faith he took seriously, and a widening circle of people who genuinely cared about him. He had taken the worst possible starting hand and turned it into something worth admiring. His role at Prepaid Legal put him in contact with hundreds of people across the country, and on a fateful day, he would meet someone who would change the trajectory of his life. It was September 2006, at a Prepaid Legal Services conference inside the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. Jodi Arias was waiting for a friend when she crossed paths with Travis Alexander. The attraction was immediate. They spent the rest of the evening talking, and Travis invited her to an executive banquet later that night. By the time the conference ended, they had stayed up together until 4 a.m. The next day, Travis told friends he believed he had found his wife. For Arias, the experience was something more specific. She had spent years drifting between cities, between identities, between versions of herself. And here was a man who was confident, charismatic, socially connected, and openly interested in her. According to those close to her at the time, the attention was intoxicating. Every major shift in Jodi's life had been catalyzed by the same thing: the arrival of a person who made her feel seen. Travis Alexander was that person now. The relationship that followed was long distance. Arias was still in California. Travis lived in Mesa, Arizona. They nurtured the connection through daily phone calls, constant emails, and visits, sometimes meeting halfway in Ehrenberg, Arizona, a desert town on the California border. The intensity was undeniable. Within just 2 months of their first meeting, Arias was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The ceremony took place on November 26, 2006. Travis himself performed the baptism. Arias would later describe the conversion as genuine, a sincere embrace of a faith that gave her structure and belonging. But those watching from the outside had questions. Travis's friends noted how quickly she had overhauled her entire belief system to mirror the man in front of her. Whether it was authentic spiritual transformation or another iteration of the identity absorption that had defined her life, the timing made it difficult to separate faith from strategy. Either way, the relationship moved fast. Arias began talking about marriage in the temple. She envisioned a future built around Travis, around the church, around the community he had introduced her to. She was, by every available account, fully invested. Travis was not. The relationship was passionate and intensely physical, but those who knew the couple described it as lacking emotional depth, driven more by desire than by tenderness. Travis publicly upheld his Mormon faith's emphasis on abstinence before marriage, yet privately the relationship contradicted those values. That gap created guilt. And according to trial testimony, Travis directed that guilt outward, at times degrading Arias with language that shocked even his close friends. But the deeper problem was structural. Jodi saw Travis as her future. Travis, by his own private admission to friends, did not see Jodi as wife material. He enjoyed the relationship on his terms, but he was not building toward the same destination she was. And as his attention began drifting toward other women in his social circle, women who, in his view, aligned more closely with the life he wanted, Arias felt the distance widening. She pushed harder for commitment. She pressed for exclusivity. Among Travis's friends, she was increasingly perceived as an outsider, tolerated but never fully welcomed. What had started as mutual attraction was becoming something lopsided and unstable. She was building her entire world around him. He was keeping his options open. Travis appeared conflicted, enjoying the present but evasive about a future together. And Jodi Arias was not the kind of person who accepted rejection quietly. On June 29, 2007, Travis Alexander ended the relationship. By his own admission to friends, his feelings for Jodi had never been about love. The connection had been physical, and he knew it. The people closest to him, friends, family, fellow church members, supported the decision. They had seen enough. It was time to move on. Jodi Arias did not move on. Within weeks of the breakup, she made a decision that stunned Travis's inner circle. She relocated to Mesa, Arizona, his city, his community, despite the fact that Travis had expressed no desire for her to be closer. She took a waitressing job. She offered to clean his house, and he agreed. What should have been a clean break became something tangled and unclear, a dynamic in which the boundaries between ex-partner, housekeeper, and lingering presence were never properly drawn. Travis allowed the arrangement. Jodi exploited it. Then Travis began dating someone new. Her name was Lisa Andrews, a young Mormon woman who aligned more closely with the values Travis publicly upheld. When Arias discovered the relationship, her behavior shifted. She sent Lisa an email filled with accusations and vitriol, a message so alarming that it startled everyone who saw it. Travis told friends that Arias had slashed his tires. He said she had hacked into his Facebook account. He described her showing up uninvited when he was with other women, harassing his dates, monitoring his movements with an intensity that was becoming impossible to ignore. One night, while Travis and Lisa were together at his home, Arias physically entered the house, sneaking in through a pet door. The intrusion was not subtle, and it was not ambiguous. It was a direct violation of his space, carried out by someone who had been told the relationship was over. In her diary, dated August 2, 2007, Arias wrote that she wished she could extinguish her feelings for Travis, as if turning off a light switch or cutting the circuit entirely. The entry suggests a woman who understood, at least intellectually, that the attachment was destructive. But understanding it and stopping it were not the same thing. In April of 2008, Arias finally moved back to Northern California, returning to her grandparents' home in Eureka. The geographic separation should have marked a turning point. It didn't. Travis, meanwhile, had met a woman named Mimi Hall through his church, someone he considered genuine marriage material. He planned a trip to Cancun with Mimi. For Arias, the Cancun trip was the ultimate confirmation that she had been replaced. The distance between them did nothing to diminish the fixation. If anything, it sharpened it. And here's where the story becomes difficult to tell cleanly, because the toxicity was not one-directional. Despite everything, despite the breakup, the stalking, the restraining of boundaries, Travis continued engaging in long-distance sexual conversations with Arias. He maintained a physical connection with a woman he had cut off emotionally. He hid the relationship from friends and family, leaving Arias in a position where she felt used, unseen, and increasingly resentful. Arias, in turn, weaponized that secrecy. She secretly recorded their private phone conversations, capturing explicit material that included Travis making a sexually graphic comment comparing her to a 12-year-old girl. Whether the recordings were insurance, leverage, or blackmail, they gave Arias something she had never had in the relationship: power. She mailed Travis pamphlets about pedophilia. His reaction, according to those who witnessed the fallout, was one of intense anger and revulsion. In a text message dated May 26, 2008, Travis told Arias plainly, "I want you to understand how evil I think you are." Each act provoked the next. Each escalation was met with retaliation. The cycle was no longer about love or even attachment. It was about destruction, and both of them were feeding it. But here's the part that should sit with you. Every warning sign in this chapter was visible. The stalking was documented. The break-ins were reported. The tire slashing, the hacking, the harassment of other women. Travis's friends saw all of it. They named it. Some of them told him to run. If you were watching someone you cared about, go through this. If you saw every one of these warning signs, what would it have taken to intervene? What would it have taken to make someone listen? Because by late May of 2008, this cycle of surveillance, provocation, and retaliation had been building for nearly a year. Travis's friends had done everything they knew how to do. They had warned him, they had named the threat, and then Travis Alexander went quiet. On the evening of June 4, 2008, Travis Alexander missed an important conference call. He didn't answer his phone, he didn't respond to texts, he didn't reply to emails. For a man who lived on constant communication, who thrived on connection, who was rarely out of reach, the silence was immediate and conspicuous. At first, his friends assumed he was busy. Then a day passed, then two. Mimi Hall, the woman Travis had planned to take to Cancun on June 10th, grew increasingly concerned. She called repeatedly. Nothing. She reached out to mutual friends, hoping someone had heard from him. No one had. 5 days passed, with no word from a man who, in the memory of everyone who knew him, had never gone 5 days without talking to someone. On the evening of June 9th, Mimi and a group of Travis's friends went to his home in Mesa to check on him. They entered the house and made their way to the master bedroom. The door was locked. When they got it open, the smell hit first. 5 days of Arizona summer heat in a sealed room. Behind that door, they found Travis Alexander. His body was in the shower. He had been dead for 5 days. What investigators later documented at the scene was staggering. Travis had sustained 27 stab wounds across his back, torso, hands, and scalp. The wounds on his hands were defensive. He had tried to fight back. His throat had been slashed in a single deep cut that severed his jugular vein, his carotid artery, and his trachea, the blade reaching nearly to his spinal cord. He had also been shot once in the forehead. Drag marks along the hallway indicated his body had been moved after the attack. On the bathroom hallway wall, investigators found a bloody palm print. Forensic testing would later confirm it contained DNA from 2 people, Travis Alexander and someone else. In the washing machine, investigators recovered a digital camera that had been run through a wash cycle. The memory card, though damaged, was intact. What those photographs contained would not become public for years, but the camera's presence in the washing machine told investigators one thing immediately: someone had tried to destroy evidence. Travis's friends did not wait for the investigation to tell them what they already believed. They called 911. On the recording, a caller told the dispatcher that a friend of theirs was dead in his bedroom, that they hadn't heard from him in days and believed he had been killed. When the dispatcher asked whether Travis had been threatened by anyone recently, the answer came without hesitation. He had an ex-girlfriend, the caller explained. She had been following him, bothering him, slashing his tires. The dispatcher asked for a name. Her name is Jodi. It was the first name spoken in the investigation, offered before detectives arrived, before forensic teams processed the scene, before a single piece of physical evidence had been formally analyzed. The people closest to Travis Alexander already knew who they believed was responsible. They had watched the obsession build for over a year. They had named the threat while Travis was still alive. Now he was dead. And the name they had been saying for months was the first one they gave to police. The discovery of Travis Alexander's body sent shockwaves through his community. The church, the prepaid legal network, the circle of friends who had watched the relationship with Arias deteriorate from uncomfortable to alarming to something they couldn't quite bring themselves to name. Now they had to name it. Now it was a homicide investigation. And the question on everyone's mind, the same question the police would begin asking within hours, was simple. Where is Jodi Arias? She was in Northern California, and she had been busy. In the days between Travis Alexander's murder and the discovery of his body, Arias had done something that investigators would later describe as chilling in its deliberateness. She called Travis's phone and left voicemails. She sent him text messages. She wrote him emails, casual, breezy messages asking how he was doing, expressing regret that she hadn't been able to stop by. To anyone monitoring Travis's accounts, Jodi Arias appeared to be a woman who had no idea her ex-boyfriend was dead. She was building an alibi in real time, writing to a man whose body was decomposing in his shower. When a mutual friend named Daniel called to tell her that Travis had been found dead, Arias reacted with distress and disbelief. And then she did something that stunned the people who knew them both. She attended Travis Alexander's memorial service. She didn't slip in quietly and sit in the back. According to those present, she introduced herself to Mimi Hall, the woman Travis had planned to take to Cancun. She mingled among his grieving friends. Her boldness raised eyebrows across the room and fueled whispers about her possible involvement in a death that, officially, was still under investigation. 10 days after the body was discovered, on June 19, 2008, Mesa homicide detectives traveled to Eureka, California, to interview their prime suspect. The interrogation that followed would produce some of the most widely viewed footage in American true crime history. This is the footage the audience saw in the opening of this documentary, and now it has context. When left alone in the room, Arias hummed to herself. She sang, she stretched and performed a headstand. These were not the behaviors of a woman overwhelmed by the gravity of what was happening. They were the behaviors of someone who had spent her entire life performing, stepping into whatever identity the moment required. The interrogation room was just another stage. Detectives confronted Arias with evidence recovered from the digital camera found in Travis's washing machine. Forensic technicians had managed to retrieve deleted images from the damaged memory card. Among them were photographs of Arias and Alexander together on June 4th, the day he was killed, including intimate images timestamped that afternoon. More critically, the camera had captured at least one inadvertent image during the attack itself, a photograph that appeared to show a bleeding body on the bathroom floor. The evidence placed Arias inside Travis Alexander's home on the day of his death, in the very room where he was murdered. When detectives informed her she was being charged with first-degree murder, Arias did not ask for a lawyer. She asked if she could put on makeup before they took her mugshot. On July 9, 2008, her 28th birthday, a Maricopa County grand jury indicted Jodi Arias on one count of first-degree murder. 6 days later, on July 15th, she was arrested at her grandparents' home in Eureka and subsequently extradited to Arizona. What followed was a media spectacle. Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio, known for his media-friendly approach to high-profile inmates, allowed journalists extensive access to Arias, providing her with a platform she appeared to relish. She won a jailhouse singing competition and spoke openly about the attention she was receiving. In a September 2008 interview with Inside Edition, Arias looked directly into the camera and declared, "No jury is going to convict me. I am innocent, and you can mark my words on that." Her certainty rested on a story that was already beginning to collapse. In total, Arias offered 3 different accounts of what happened on June 4th. The first, given during the initial investigation, was outright denial. She claimed she hadn't been at Travis's home and hadn't seen him in months. The second emerged publicly in the fall of 2008, when she told media outlets that 2 masked intruders had broken into the house and killed Travis while she was present. The third did not come until August of 2010, 2 full years after her arrest, when Arias finally admitted to killing Travis Alexander, but insisted she had acted in self-defense, claiming he had attacked her first. Each version crumbled under the weight of evidence the audience has already seen. The camera photographs, the palm print, the 5 days of alibi-building voicemails, the friends who named her before police even arrived. The question was no longer who killed Travis Alexander. The question now was why. Jodi Arias had been caught. Her stories had collapsed. But the investigation was about to reveal something the public hadn't yet seen, a level of planning that would eliminate any remaining question about premeditation. What investigators pieced together in the months following Arias's arrest was a trail of preparation that stretched back more than a week before Travis Alexander's death. A sequence of calculated steps that, taken individually, might have seemed unremarkable, but taken together revealed something methodical and deliberate. Before the body was found, before the 5 days of silence, before the 911 call, there was a plan. On May 26, 2008, Travis sent Arias a text message. It read, "I want you to understand how evil I think you are." 2 days later, on May 28th, a burglary was reported at the home of Arias's grandparents in Eureka, California, the same home where she had been living since her return from Arizona. Among the items reported stolen was a .25 caliber handgun. Prosecutors would later argue that Arias had staged the burglary herself. She knew where her grandfather kept his firearms. She knew the house, and the caliber of the stolen weapon matched the caliber of the bullet that would later be recovered from Travis Alexander's skull. In the days that followed, Arias dyed her hair. She had been blonde for years, a look she had adopted during her reinvention in California. Now she went back to brown. Whether the change was meant to avoid recognition or to shed the last traces of the identity she had built around Travis, it was one more detail in a pattern that investigators would later describe as a preparation checklist. On June 2, 2008, Arias rented a white Ford Focus from Budget Rent-A-Car at the Redding Airport, approximately 90 miles south of Eureka. Prosecutors argued that she chose a rental location far from home, specifically to reduce the likelihood of being recognized. According to the state's case, she also removed the front license plate and inverted the rear one, making the vehicle difficult to identify on the road. The following day, June 3rd, Arias drove to Monterey, California, where she visited her ex-boyfriend, Daryl Brewer. She asked to borrow 2 5-gallon gas cans, telling him she was making a long drive to Southern California. Brewer agreed. Arias then drove 20 miles to Salinas and purchased a third 5-gallon gas can at Walmart. Later that day, she filled all 3 cans at a service station in Pasadena. The purpose, according to investigators, was to carry enough fuel to drive through Arizona without stopping at a single gas station, avoiding security cameras, credit card records, and any traceable evidence that she had ever been in the state. She turned off her cell phone. With the phone powered down, her location could not be tracked through cellular signals. The digital trail went dark. Arias drove through the night. The trip from California to Mesa, Arizona, covered nearly 1,000 miles. According to the prosecution's reconstruction, she arrived at Travis Alexander's home in the early hours of June 4, 2008. She entered through the garage, using a security code she knew from her time living in his world. Travis was inside. He was asleep. In the early hours of June 4, 2008, Jodi Arias entered Travis Alexander's home. She had a knife, she had a gun, and she had a plan. Travis Alexander did not turn her away. Despite the unannounced arrival in the early hours of the morning, despite the breakup, the restraining of contact, the months of escalating hostility, he let her in. According to the prosecution's reconstruction, what followed was a day of disturbing normalcy. Arias and Alexander spent hours together. They were intimate. They photographed each other in sexually explicit poses. Time-stamped images recovered from the damaged camera would later place both of them in the bedroom at approximately 1:40 in the afternoon. For reasons that no one outside that house will ever fully understand, Travis Alexander spent the last day of his life with the woman who had stalked him, harassed his girlfriends, broken into his home, and slashed his tires. By late afternoon, Arias was photographing Travis in the shower. The final image of him alive was time-stamped at 5:29 p.m. He is standing under the water, looking directly into the camera. He appears calm, exposed, unaware of what is about to happen. Within minutes, the scene became something else entirely. Based on forensic evidence analyzed by the Maricopa County Medical Examiner, the attack began with a knife. Travis, caught naked, wet, and confined in the shower, was struck first in the torso. Given his significant physical advantage over Arias, investigators believe the initial wound was delivered to incapacitate him, preventing any effective resistance. It succeeded. What followed was relentless. The medical examiner, Dr. Kevin Horn, documented 27 stab wounds across Travis's back, torso, hands, and scalp. The wounds on his hands were defensive, deep slashes and punctures that showed he had tried, desperately, to fight back. Despite those efforts, the attack continued. Arias slashed his throat in a single deep cut that severed his jugular vein, his common carotid artery, and his trachea. The blade reached nearly to his spinal cord. Dr. Horn testified that Travis would have lost consciousness within seconds of that wound and died within minutes. The final injury was a gunshot wound to the forehead, fired with a .25 caliber pistol, the same caliber as the weapon stolen from her grandparents' home 1 week earlier. The medical examiner testified that the gunshot was likely inflicted after the stabbing, possibly after Travis was already dead. The sequence, knife first, throat slash, gunshot last, would become a point of legal contention at trial after lead detective Esteban Flores initially testified that the gunshot came first, only for the medical examiner to contradict him on the stand. 27 stab wounds, a throat cut nearly to the spine, a bullet to the forehead, and then she started cleaning. The shift in behavior was immediate. According to investigators, Arias dragged Travis Alexander's body from the hallway back to the shower. She washed the blood from the floors and walls. She ran his bed sheets and clothing through the laundry. She placed the digital camera, the camera that held time-stamped images of their final hours together, into the washing machine and put it through a cycle. She was methodical. She was thorough, and she was not thorough enough. A bloody palm print remained on the bathroom hallway wall, bearing a mixture of her DNA and his, the single piece of physical evidence that would irrevocably tie her to the crime scene. In the days that followed, Arias continued constructing her alibi. She left voicemails on Travis's phone. She sent him text messages and emails, casual, conversational, as though nothing had happened, as though she didn't know he was dead. She drove to Utah. On the way, she was stopped by a police officer who noticed her rear license plate was upside down. She told the officer it was the result of a prank, kids messing with her car. The officer let her go. She arrived at the home of Ryan Burns in West Jordan, a suburb of Salt Lake City, the following day. Burns would later testify that her demeanor was surprisingly normal, unremarkable even. He noticed her formerly blonde hair was now brown. He noticed small cuts on her hands. She told him the injuries came from broken glass at her job. There was no such job. The restaurant she described did not exist. She returned the rental car to Budget in Redding, California. The odometer showed approximately 3,000 miles of driving, far more than any trip to Utah would require. 3,000 miles on a rental car, a dead man in a shower, and a woman who believed she had gotten away with it. She hadn't. It took more than 4 years to bring Jodi Arias to trial. Jury selection began on December 10, 2012, 1,646 days after Travis Alexander's body was discovered. Opening arguments followed on January 2, 2013, in the Maricopa County Superior Court, presided over by Judge Sherry Stevens. The prosecution was led by Juan Martinez, a veteran deputy county attorney known for his aggressive courtroom style. The defense was handled by L. Kirk Nurmi and Jennifer Wilmot. Before the trial began, the defense raised objections about the jury's composition on the basis of gender and racial diversity. The court denied those challenges. Arias was also ordered to undergo IQ and competency testing. She was ruled fit to stand trial. Perhaps more revealing was an early evidence battle. The prosecution initially claimed that no relevant text messages existed between Arias and Alexander, but after court-ordered disclosure, hundreds of messages and approximately 8,000 emails were produced. The communications painted a far more complex picture of the relationship than either side had initially acknowledged. The prosecution's case was built on a single premise: that Jodi Arias had murdered Travis Alexander in a calculated act of jealousy-driven premeditation. Martinez walked the jury through each step of planning the documentary has already covered: the staged burglary and the .25 caliber handgun that matched the bullet recovered from Travis's skull, the rental car picked up 90 miles from home, the gas cans borrowed from Darrell Brewer, and the third one purchased at Walmart, all designed, prosecutors argued, to cross Arizona without leaving a traceable record, the license plates that had been removed and inverted. The cell phone powered off. Martinez called Ryan Burns to testify about Arias's behavior the day after the murder. Her surprisingly normal demeanor, the cuts on her hands blamed on a restaurant job that did not exist. He presented the intimate photographs recovered from the camera as evidence that Arias had been inside Travis's home on the day he died. And he returned repeatedly to a text message Travis had sent Arias on May 26, 2008. The message telling her he understood how evil he believed she was. Martinez argued that this message became the trigger, the moment Arias decided Travis Alexander would not be allowed to move on without her. The defense offered a fundamentally different reading of the same evidence. Nurmi and Wilmot presented Arias not as a predator, but as a victim, a woman who had endured years of escalating abuse, both physical and psychological, at the hands of Travis Alexander. They argued that the killing was not premeditated, it was self-defense. Travis, they contended, had attacked Arias first, and she had responded with lethal force to protect her own life. Arias took the witness stand in her own defense and testified for 18 days, an extraordinary duration that turned the trial into a spectacle watched by millions. She described alleged abuse from her childhood at the hands of her parents. She accused Alexander of harboring pedophilic tendencies. She claimed that the sexual relationship had been coercive and degrading, and that the final confrontation on June 4th had begun when Travis lunged at her in a violent rage. The defense called Alice Laviolette, a domestic violence expert, who testified that the relationship between Arias and Alexander exhibited hallmarks of intimate partner abuse, and that Arias presented as a victim, not an aggressor. Laviolette's testimony provoked an extraordinary public backlash. She received death threats. More than 500 negative reviews appeared on Amazon for a book she had not yet published. The hostility was so severe that she declined to return for the penalty phase retrial. The defense also sought to introduce emails written by Chris and Sky Hughes, close friends of Travis's, in which the couple expressed concern about his treatment of women. In one exchange, Travis had acknowledged being, in his own words, somewhat sociopathic in how he handled romantic relationships. However, the court ruled these emails inadmissible as hearsay, noting they pertained to Travis's general behavior toward women, rather than his conduct toward Arias specifically. The jury never saw them. At the center of the trial was a battle between expert psychologists that would define how the jury understood Arias's mind. The defense called Dr. Richard Samuels, a clinical psychologist, who diagnosed Arias with acute stress disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. He argued that her fragmented memory of the killing, her insistence that she could not recall key details, was consistent with extreme psychological trauma, not deception. The prosecution countered with Dr. Janine DeMarte, a younger clinical psychologist whose testimony would prove pivotal. DeMart diagnosed Arias with borderline personality disorder, a framework defined by identity instability, intense fear of abandonment, impulsive aggression, and chronic difficulty maintaining stable relationships. It was a diagnosis that mapped, with striking precision, onto the behavioral pattern this documentary has traced from its first chapter. The identity reinvention, the attachment to whoever stood closest, the abandonment terror that escalated to violence. DeMarte did not claim that BPD caused the murder. She argued that it provided the psychological architecture within which the crime made sense. The defense brought in Dr. Robert Geffner, who challenged the validity of the psychological testing used to support the BPD diagnosis, arguing that the MMPI assessment had been misapplied. The prosecution responded with Dr. Jill Hayes, who defended both the methodology and DeMarte's conclusions. Throughout this battle, 3 jurors were dismissed for unrelated reasons, 1 for misconduct, 1 for health issues, and 1 after a DUI arrest, reducing the panel and heightening the stakes. In closing arguments, Martinez described the killing as a slaughter. He displayed crime scene photographs. He returned to the text message in which Travis called Arias evil. The defense argued that the prosecution's premeditation theory contained contradictions, asking why a woman planning a covert killing would leave security camera footage at the rental car agency, keep gas can receipts, and spend the night at a friend's house in Utah. In rebuttal, Martinez directed the jury back to the forensic evidence. The sheer number and variety of wounds, he argued, was not consistent with self-defense. It was consistent with rage. The jury was instructed that they could find Arias guilty of first-degree murder under either of 2 legal theories, premeditation or felony murder, and was sent to deliberate. After less than 3 days of deliberation, following 4 months of testimony, the jury reached its verdict. For Travis Alexander's family, who had waited 5 years for this moment, the answer was finally coming. On May 8, 2013, the jury returned. All 12 jurors found Jodi Arias guilty of first-degree murder. Every member of the panel agreed that the killing had been premeditated. 7 additionally found her guilty under the secondary legal theory of felony murder. There was no dissent, there was no ambiguity, it was unanimous. Inside the courtroom, the Alexander family collapsed into each other's arms. Outside, crowds that had gathered on the courthouse steps erupted. For a family that had waited nearly 5 years, through the silence, the investigation, the media spectacle, and the 3 collapsing stories, the word guilty carried a weight that went beyond the legal definition. It was confirmation. It was the first thing that had made sense since June 9, 2008. But the trial was not over. Under Arizona law, a first-degree murder conviction required a separate aggravation phase to determine whether the death penalty could be imposed. That phase commenced on May 15, 2013. The prosecution called medical examiner Dr. Kevin Horn back to the stand. His testimony was clinical and systematic, a recounting of the autopsy findings designed to establish that the manner of killing met the legal threshold for exceptional cruelty. 27 stab wounds, a throat slash that severed the jugular vein, the carotid artery, and the trachea, a gunshot wound to the forehead, defensive wounds on the victim's hands confirming that Travis Alexander had been conscious and fighting for his life during the attack. Then prosecutor Juan Martinez did something the courtroom did not expect. He stopped talking. For 2 full minutes, he stood in silence. No argument, no evidence, no words. He wanted the jury to feel, in real time, how long Travis Alexander had remained alive while the attack was happening, the approximate duration of suffering the medical evidence supported. The courtroom sat in that silence. Nobody moved. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They returned with a finding of exceptional cruelty. Jodi Arias was now eligible for the death penalty. What followed should have been the final chapter. Instead, it became the most agonizing. On May 21, 2013, Arias addressed the jury during the penalty phase. She reversed her previous public statement, made in a jailhouse media interview, in which she had said she preferred death to life in prison. Now, standing before the jury that would decide her fate, she asked them to spare her life. She wore a t-shirt printed with the word "Survivor." She proposed selling merchandise to raise money for domestic violence awareness. She presented herself, once again, as a victim, this time not of Travis Alexander, but of the system prosecuting her. Travis Alexander's family delivered victim impact statements. His siblings spoke directly to the jury about the brother they had lost and the life that had been taken from him. They described the permanent damage the murder had inflicted on their family, the inability to look at photographs of Travis without seeing what had been done to him, the holidays that would never feel complete, the grief that no verdict could undo. The emotional weight in the courtroom was immense. On May 23, 2013, the jury deadlocked. The vote was 8-4 in favor of the death penalty, short of the unanimity required under Arizona law. Judge Stevens declared a mistrial on the penalty phase. The conviction stood. The sentence did not. The case entered a second penalty phase. A retrial focused solely on whether Arias should receive death or life in prison. It began in October of 2014 with a new jury. The proceedings introduced evidence that had not been available during the first trial. A Walmart employee named Amanda Webb acknowledged that the store's records of gas can purchases were incomplete, complicating one element of the prosecution's premeditation timeline. More significantly, in January 2015, forensic examination of Travis Alexander's personal laptop revealed the presence of viruses and pornographic material, evidence the defense argued had been improperly withheld and which they contended supported their narrative of Travis's hidden behavior. Deliberations began on February 12, 2015. Weeks later, the second jury deadlocked as well. Some media reports placed the vote at 11-1 in favor of death, though the exact split was never officially confirmed by the court. One juror had held out. That juror's identity was never publicly released, but they faced intense public backlash, threats, doxing, and harassment from members of the public who believed Arias deserved to die. On March 5, 2015, Judge Stevens declared a second mistrial. Under Arizona law, the death penalty was now permanently off the table. 2 juries, 2 deadlocks. After 7 years, millions of dollars, and more suffering than any family should endure, the question of Jodi Arias' final sentence still didn't have an answer. Before the sentence was read, Travis Alexander's family spoke for the last time in open court. His aunt addressed Judge Stevens directly. She described what the murder had done to a family that was already no stranger to suffering. A family that had survived poverty, addiction, and the early loss of both parents. She told the court that her family would never again be able to look at photographs of Travis without seeing the image of what had been done to him. She spoke about the permanence of that damage, the way violence doesn't end when the verdict is read, the way it rewrites every memory that came before it. Her words carried the weight of 7 years of waiting. On April 13, 2015, Judge Sherry Stevens sentenced Jodi Arias to natural life in the Arizona Department of Corrections without the possibility of parole. There would be no early release. There would be no clemency hearing. The sentence was final. Before it was handed down, Arias addressed the court. She maintained her claim of self-defense, but acknowledged the devastation her actions had caused. She told the judge she was disgusted and repulsed with herself and expressed a wish that she could take it back. Whether those words reflected genuine remorse or another performance in a case defined by performances, the court did not speculate. The sentence stood. The trial had cost Maricopa County taxpayers an estimated $3 million. Arias was ordered to pay more than $32,000 in restitution to Travis Alexander's siblings. The legal proceedings did not end with sentencing. On July 6, 2018, Arias' attorneys filed a 324-page appeal challenging her conviction. The central argument focused on prosecutorial misconduct by Juan Martinez, alleging that his conduct during the trial, combined with the intensity of media coverage, had prevented Arias from receiving a fair proceeding. On March 24, 2020, the Arizona Court of Appeals issued its ruling. The court did not dismiss the misconduct claims. It acknowledged what it called egregious behavior by the prosecutor during the trial, but it upheld the conviction, concluding that the evidence of Arias' guilt was overwhelming, sufficient to sustain the verdict regardless of Martinez's conduct. In November of 2020, the Arizona Supreme Court declined to review the case. the conviction was final. In an ironic footnote, Martinez himself was later disbarred. The Arizona State Bar found him guilty of sexual harassment of female law clerks and witnesses, as well as lying under oath during the investigation into his own conduct. The prosecutor who had built the case against Jodi Arias was ultimately held accountable for his own pattern of behavior, though that development does not alter the legal standing of the conviction. Today, Jodi Arias is incarcerated at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. Her ADIC inmate number is 281129. She was initially housed in the high-security Lumley unit and has since been moved to medium security. She will spend the rest of her natural life in state custody. For the Alexander family, the sentence brought a measure of closure, not healing, but an end to the cycle. After 7 years of investigations, trials, retrials, and appeals, they were no longer tethered to a courtroom calendar. They could begin the work of carrying Travis's memory forward without the weight of legal uncertainty pressing against every step. And that leaves the question this channel set out to examine. The warning signs in this case were not hidden. They were documented in diary entries, in emails, in police reports about slashed tires and break-ins and hacked accounts. Travis Alexander's friends saw the obsession building. They named it. Some of them told him to run. The system that was supposed to intervene, the social infrastructure of family, friends, faith, and community, recognized the danger in real time. And none of it was enough. What did everyone miss? In this case, the answer is not that they missed the danger. It is that seeing the danger was not enough to stop what was coming. The gap between recognition and prevention is where this story lives, and it is a gap that remains open. What are your views on this case? Do you think justice was served? Let us know in the comments, and if this is your first time here, welcome to Undocumented Crimes.